We're absolutely thrilled to announce our new partnership with Cuisinart. Woo!
Cuisinart's been cooking up reliable kitchen gear for over 50 years, helping to make mealtime easier and more enjoyable.
A few months back, we were in Boston for an event and had to whip up a big batch of our healthier cookie dough bites. Our friend who we were staying with pulled out her Cuisinart food processor, which she got as a wedding gift 30 years ago. And honestly, it looked and worked like it was brand new. That machine was an absolute workhorse.
So we're genuinely delighted to team up with Cuisinart to keep sharing our passion for food, recipes and healthy eating, now with the help of their amazing tools.
Whether you're a seasoned chef or just getting started in the kitchen, Cuisinart has everything you need to make great food again and again.
Welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. It really, really is.
Yeah, thank you for making it.
Thank you. Okay, opening question. What is your mission?
My mission is our mission, but mine specifically as the founder, I suppose, would be to serve transformational foods for mind, body, and soul.
Oh, that's a nice answer. Transformational foods for mind, body, and soul. Good one. Okay, where to go now? Oh my God!
Is that a hard one to follow?
No, it's a good one. No, it sounds like, but maybe like, okay, maybe expand out on that, because that sounds more like a definition out of a dictionary. Like, if you were to tell, if you were to give them, if someone on the bus asked you, what's your mission? You probably wouldn't give that. But someone on the bus isn't gonna go, what's your mission? They go, what are you into? Or something like that.
What do you do? Yeah, okay.
Well, I suppose, transformational food is food that enables you to transform your body, right? And I think that's what Farmacy's been about. And that's my own personal obsession, is finding foods that are able to transform your body.
Okay, to dig
in with that. So that's my mission.
Is there such a thing as a food that does not transform the body?
Yes, absolutely. Because you can
is that not a transformation?
No, you can denature your body.
Okay, denature.
You can denature your body.
Sorry, no, I think you're totally right. Yeah, to transform. I think it's a wonderful mission, and we're fully aligned.
Thank you. I know you are.
Yeah, 100%.
I love that what you said though about foods that denature the body, because what Camilla and I have always connected on is the fact that food is such a direct connection to landscape and to nature. And it's a connection that even if we live in cities, we all have several times a day. So is the food that you're eating, is it connecting you back to nature, or is it connecting you to factories? I think that's a basic question. And that's, so it makes a lot of sense to me. Like, the food that you're eating can be transforming you to become more like nature or less like nature, depending on where it's coming from.
And I think that's something that so many people forget in our industrial food system, and also in our urbanized existence, that people forget that food does have this quality that it's often seen as something just to keep us going, or something we feel sad, we feel tired, we feel whatever. I need chocolate, I need coffee, I need chips love me, oh my God, or pizza, I want fast food. But we seldom approach food as that opportunity to connect to the landscape, or to connect with the season, or to connect with the soil or the earth. I wonder if you could expand on that for someone that this is a new concept to them, or something that, not a new concept, but maybe something they haven't reflected upon.
Yeah, I think I was reading actually on my way over here, John O'Donoghue, your wonderful
the
poet of the Irish landscape. And he was talking about how landscape can be, for some people, it's just dead geography, a source of resources or something that you traverse to get from one place to another. But of course, the truth about landscapes is that they're vividly alive, as much or more than we are, in ways that, we can begin to understand, and also in ways that we can never fathom. And so food is not just one of the ways in which we connect with nature, but the most visceral, by definition, connection that we have with nature. It connects our guts, our bodies directly into a landscape. So I think that that's one of the most natural questions that you can ask yourself. What sorts of landscapes do you want to be viscerally connected to? Ones that are thrumming with life and diverse and that feel like nature, or in the food that you're eating, are you connecting yourself to factories or to monocultures where farmers have to wear gas masks in order to perform their daily duties? That's quite literally the question that each of us get to engage with every time we go to eat. And sometimes that can be a bit heavy, it's quite a big responsibility when you sit to think about it, but it's also this tremendous opportunity to change our relationship with nature, change the substrate of our bodies, and quite literally to change what the landscapes around us look like.
Love it. Glorious. Okay, I want to land this. I want to bring this back up a little bit here before we go philosophical, because I agree 1,000,000% whatever you said. I'd love to dig into that.
Wait, this is her first podcast. You don't even know what you're getting yourselves into. It's going to be for an hour of philosophy, so I'm just warning you.
That's our sweet spot. But for people who are listening, we need to get a context. Okay, so Farmacy was started in 2016. If you could tell us, like, what inspired you and what was what led to you personally going, right, I want to, as you said, your mission is to use food to transform humans, for the better. And Farmacy, like, what was your intention or what kind of motivated you to start it? And what is Farmacy for anyone who's listening?
Okay. Well, I mean, it's like, do we want the long answer, short answer? Okay, sure. We'll give you a little summary. So Farmacy was really created out of my, I suppose, just deep conviction towards activism around food, the industry, why we weren't getting, I suppose, the truth around food and what we were eating. Why were people so sick? Why are we faced with, chronic illnesses, epidemic of obesity, heart disease, you name it. The world is suffering and has been suffering this unbelievable health crises for, how many decades. I actually got very sick myself in my early 20s. I was faced with autoimmune issues, chronic illnesses, things that a thriving 20-year-old shouldn't be having. So just through my own research, I used the word biohacking, which I think was coined recently, but it was what I was doing 10 years ago, 15 years ago, trying to get myself to understand what was wrong with me, why I had all these illnesses at such a young age. What was it to do with, was it lifestyle? Was it environment? Was it food? What was it that, was obviously causing me these illnesses? So I really went on my own personal health journey. I learned the hard way. I very much kind of put my body through a lot of stress and, I kind of swung from, one end of the pendulum to the other. I was eating the junk food, drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, doing all the really kind of toxic things in my 20s. But then I came to realize that, it really was the food that I was eating that was, turning, and of course the kind of toxin overload that was turning, turning my understanding to its environment, its food, where I'm getting my food from, that was actually making me sick, nothing else. So, I've really kind of put myself through it, and all the experiences I've had, have kind of brought me to basically investigate the food around us, the world around us, and, how to bring this understanding into a very simple notion. Because I think there's a lot of information out there on health. There's a lot of doctors. There's a lot of people that are ready to give you advice. So what I did was, really kind of, I suppose I was lucky enough to travel the world, meet some really weird and wonderful teachers and holistic practitioners and, quote unquote gurus and health educators.
Who was the most interesting out of all the people you met, or who was the most kind of, the one who had the most impact?
Right now.
Yeah. Because that sounds interesting, like a tour of kind of gurus and specialists and interesting health aficionados.
I would say I've met some incredible... Okay, so one of the first ever understanding of the gut that I ever got was at a place in Thailand. So it was this kind of very super strangely holistic health center in Thailand, 3 hours out of Bangkok. And that's really where I understood the connection between gut and mind. I was suffering with a lot of anxiety at the time, and I remember her talking about this, just kind of it's an ancient, Chinese practice that, that connected the dots between the gut and the mind, thousands of years ago. And I think this understanding between the gut and the mind is only what mainstream medicine has decided to, focus on in the past, just 10 years. So understanding that at this very weird health center in Thailand really changed my perspective of mental health, the gut, gut-brain axis. And then from then on, it kind of really sprouted this kind of, this real journey within. And, you know, the foods that we were eating was basically the detonator to, you know, what was happening in the mind. So that was just one of the people I'd met on that journey. But I mean, yeah.
Sounds fun.
We're weird and wonderful people.
I'd say we could camp out into some of these, but we won't.
Yeah. So that's
But amazing to hear like exactly what you said, Aurora, just a few minutes ago, that like, you know, you physically experienced this idea of food. You know, food connects you to factories, or food can connect you to a landscape, and food can either feed your spirit and nourish you, or food can have the capacity to do the opposite.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's you know, as I said, this detonator food, you know, it's a reactive substance. So it's a psycho-reactive substance, and it really does have this, you know, impact to, you know, change your entire, you know, your mindset, your vision, your perspective on everything, on the whole entire world. So, you know, I'm very mindful of what I eat now. I'm very discerning of what I eat and what I put in my body, because I've seen how it can play such an impact on mental health. And I've been able to really just be my own experiment, really. And that's really where my business comes from. It comes from the heart. It comes from experience. It comes from bad experiences. And then, just kind of deciphering all of those, travels and meetings into, a lot of research, a lot of love, and, you know, putting that into my first ever, you know, pharmacy business manual, which was 10 years old now.
Well done. Am I right in guessing, like, you originally started with a 1 acre plot of land to grow the most nutrient dense food you could for yourself and your family, and due to having excess of it, you decided, let's open a restaurant, let's feed others, let's feed the masses, let's transform society?
Yes and no. Yeah, yes and no. There's definitely, definitely parts of that. So we started the restaurant 2016. And because of, look, you guys know more than anyone, the kind of supply chain of organic produce, or, just produce without chemicals, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides is like almost impossible to get hold of. And I think back then in 2016, it was, it was a real fight to be able to, vision up this restaurant. And know then that, what we were serving our customers was not grown in the best possible quality soils. So we opened the restaurant, and we had, we really kind of scoured the country, and obviously, Europe to try and get the best produce. But we were still finding that some of the standards on these organic farms were not great. So, different, specifically Holland. So Holland doesn't have the best organic standard practices. They're kind of, they're loose. So we were getting a lot of different produce and just not being particularly happy with it. So, obviously wanting to then grow our own came from that. But yeah, of course, wanting to be able to feed myself and my children, my family, the best possible produce was, of course, a driver. And I think it was, it was a two-tongued approach, really.
Because what's so nice about like the name Farmacy, it really does, it's in the name. It really is like, and above a restaurant, it's like a pharmacy. Oh, this must be good for me. This must come from a farm. Like it says it like it's a really good name. Yeah. It's a great name.
Absolutely. It says what it does on the label.
Yeah, exactly. You said something there, and now this is probably teeing it back over to you, Aurora. You said about food.
The philosophy department.
Going over to the philosophy department over here. Well, you said it wasn't grown in the best soils. Yeah. And for anyone listening, they might go, well, what does soils got to do with it? Like, what does soil got to do with making healthy food? Cue Aurora. Well, I'm sure you can answer it too, Camilla.
Absolutely, and it's our kind of joint passion and obsession, and that's why
the first conversation we ever had was about soil.
We tell us about this conversation. Where did it happen?
Geeked out. So
where did you first meet?
We met through a friend, and I think actually our first meeting was online, and it was some conversation about food and what direction food should go in and how to fix the food system, and there were people talking about technology and all these things, and then one of us started talking about soil. I can't remember which. And the other one was just nodding furiously. And then we realized, okay, both of us are soil heads. And, she gets
soil
it.
Soil heads. I like that one. About nematodes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think anything that is good in food comes from the soil. Soil is this thin cushion, a few inches between rock and sky, that is the basis for all terrestrial life. So our own life and the life of everything we eat comes from the soil, except for maybe 1% that may come from the oceans, but 99% of it, it's all coming from the soil. And soil is fervently alive. We used to think of it as a kind of medium, like a chemical mix of, it has a bit of this and it has a bit of that. But no, soil is actually an ecosystem. So this extremely intricate community of a bunch of different organisms, microorganisms, probably the most complex of all the ecosystems on Earth. And science is only recently, in the last 10 years or so, beginning to understand soil as an ecosystem. So from this thriving community of tiny creatures making their lives, making their homes in the soil, that creates this material, this layer of life in which plants grow. And some of those plants become our food or become the food of other animals. So if you want nutrition in food, those nutrients that are going to be in your food come from the rich soil. If there's not nutrients in the soil, if there's not life in the soil, that's not going to be in your food. If you want flavor in your food, it turns out flavor is connected to nutrients. So anything that you may be looking for in your food, all of that can be traced back to the soil. So that's the first place to look. And what's fascinating about soil is that, of course, it's our interest in it maybe that's where our food comes from. But anything else that you look at, for the earth itself, it's also this breathing medium. So if what you're talking about is balancing out the atmosphere, regulating water to prevent drought, to prevent floods, all of those things are mediated through the soil. So it's actually, the more that we've studied this, the more you realize, is anything more important than soil in a certain sense? So whether you're talking about the world out there and Earth systems or our own internal physiological systems, it's really all connected to the soil.
It really encompasses all life. No. One thing in your beautiful book, Manifesto on the Future of Food, Farmacy, which the text is beautiful. I was commenting how articulate and how succinct it really is. But there's a wonderful graph in there, and I love the fact that it's the way you've laid the book out is very beautiful. It's very artistic, but you've like an old school Venn diagram where there's two circles. One is soil health, one is human health, and you go through the cross section where the two of them unite. And many people listening might see soil as something separate, something outside, and that we live in a silo, and that something to clean off your boot, and something that we tend to forget how human existence is fully interdependent. We are so... our health is dictated by the health of the world, and we're ultimately, without going too hyper-philosophical, we're all ultimately united in this wonderful adventure called life. But I wonder if you could expand on that cool Venn diagram about how soil health affects human health and how they're intrinsically linked.
As science is discovering the importance of the micro communities in soil, other branches of science are discovering the importance of the micro communities in our gut, and how this is the basis not only for digestive health, but immune health, mental health. And it all goes back to, how healthy is your gut microbiome. And it turns out that the human gut microbiome has all the same clades as the soil microbiome.
Clades. Now, you said a word there that very few people listening will have an idea what it means. I don't know what that one means.
It's the same communities of microorganisms. So the microbiome that you have in your gut, some of it you inherit from your families, from your mother at the moment of birth, but every time that you eat, you're ingesting a bunch of microorganisms. So again, if the food that you eat comes from a healthy, thriving soil, then you're helping to regulate and maintain that internal ecology, what's going on in your digestive tract. If what you're eating is dead, essentially, because it's been packaged or pasteurized or denatured or extruded or all of these things that happen in the industrial food line, then they're not going to be living foods. Or if it doesn't come from a living soil, it's not going to have that. So that's one of the first connections. Food is something that's alive. It's a whole ecology, a whole biology. And the act of eating is the act by which we take the biology of the outer world, the ecology out of the outer world, and it becomes our inner ecology. So if that ecology isn't thriving, our inner ecology won't be thriving.
I'm a father of 3 children, and anyone listening who has young kids or has young kids in their life and you want them to eat healthier, it's typically difficult to get them to eat vegetables, in particular green vegetables.
By juicing, it's a wonderful way of sneaking in different vegetables. I know we have an J2 juicer, which I use at home, which has got hands-free technology, and I will literally stuff in a load of farm veg. So beetroot, carrot, could be celery, pak choy, and I'll stuff in loads of greens with some ginger and apple to help sweeten it. And they'll drink it. They'll drink anywhere from 200 to 500 ml glass, and they'll actually quite like it.
Yeah, we started one of Ireland's juice bars over 20 years ago, so we really know juicers. And the J2 juicer is honestly the best home juicer on the market, bar none. As Stephen mentioned, it's got hands-free technology, so it's got a hopper at the top that you load the veg in, and you just turn it on and you can go off and have a shower or make your porridge and come back and your juice is made for you. It's very easy to clean. It's got super slow revolution, so the quality of the juice is next level. And it also comes with a 15-year warranty, so it's made to last. As we said, we know home juicers. We really do. And this is the best on the market. The J2, they've also got a J3, which is a smaller one for smaller workspaces or for travel. You can get 10% off with the code HAPPYPEAR10 at checkout. That's namawell.com, HAPPYPEAR10. Best juices in the market, bar none. Wow. And that's very much what's happening at the moment. You know, it really is. Like it's, you know, like your book, The Manifesto on the Future of Food, I read it at the weekend, and it really is a wonderful, like you'd kind of go, as you kind of implied there, like soil, there's nothing more important than soil. But to most people listening, you know, obviously some people listening will agree, but most people will go, soil, how is soil? What about like crypto? What about tech? What about the new iPhone? You know, that's way more important than soil or finance or economies or, you know, these are way more important. Money, way more important. Soil, come on, I got it on my shoes. Like, I don't like soil. It's dirty. I got to wash it in my fingernails. But maybe if you could, this is a general one. I remember you read The Third Plate by Dan Barber a good few years ago, and you were talking about how the crazy correlation between as soil quality erodes, so does human education, so does human economics, which people go, there's no correlation between soil quality and human education and human economies. You'd kind of go, how are those correlated? But maybe, now that's a very crazy question, but how is there any correlation between like our current societies? Because in your book, like you really make these incredible connections that are very complex, deeply complex, you know, between how soil, human health, the industrial food system, how they're all correlated. And you make a lovely correlation between how the internal is reflected in the external. And currently the external world which we live in is a very industrial, you know, urban environment that, you know, is reflected in our internal.
Yeah, I mean, look, I just, you know, want to continue from that because I think, you know, this understanding of biodynamics. So I always go back to this understanding of, you know, specifically why we farm in a biodynamic way. And it always roots back to this biodynamic term that we use all the time, as above, so below. And that for me kind of, it reflects everything of what we need to know. And this kind of quantum understanding that, you know, biodynamics has is that, you know, everything that reflects in our planetary system reflects within our human bodies. The microorganisms in our gut reflects the microorganisms in our soil. And this kind of mirroring that happens within, without. So as our soil depletes and becomes, you know, kind of more toxic and, you know, less fertile, you can see that how that affects, you know, our education system, how that's affecting our neurobiology, how that's actually depleting our human capacity to be able to think, feel, do, because it has this mirroring effect. So as the lands are crumbling, you know, human nature is crumbling. And, you know, this is something that, you know, again, why biodynamics is so important to us specifically, because it has this inflection of life force. We talk about life force, and giving that life force to you through what you eat and how you grow the food is an absolutely fundamental understanding, because you are literally giving yourself this life force, and it's this circular understanding of, you know, how you feed your body is reflected through how you feed the soil. And I think, that for me just kind of answers all the questions. And again, it's, you can look at biodynamics and lots of people, someone very intellectual said to me, oh, that's just a bunch of woo woo. And I was like, wow, it's just so incredulous to think that, there isn't more research into biodynamics. There isn't more research into this, incredibly ancient understanding of farming. It's not just Steiner that coined biodynamics. This is something that we've been, this is how our ancient ancestors, it goes all the way back to the Hermetic understanding of, kind of ancient practices, ancient wisdom. And, it's just all it needs is for people just to do a little bit more research into, how this way specifically of farming, can be incredibly healing for, human nature and society in general. But again, as you say, it's not about money. It's not something to make money. It's not about technology. It's almost like the anti-technology. Biodynamics brings that very, very human nature, human touch, very grounding practice to, farming and community. So, I like to think of Farmacy as kind of counterculture business. And, we are counterculture because all we're doing is the opposite of the trend. It's like we're going away from technology.
Which isn't always easy.
Yeah, it's not as easy and people think you're nuts, and that's the thing. So it's like when I, originally came up with the idea of Farmacy, people were like, what? Like, what? No one's going to come. Like, are you mad? Plant-based? Like what? Like people just don't care about farms or farming or provenance of food or whatever. They just want something quick and easy. But again, it's like, look, we continue to take the risks. We continue to, just dive deep into the things that are inherent to our nature. And that is, these ancient practices and things that are, have been going on thousands and thousands of years. Very long answer for.
No, I think it's great. I remember in Missouri back, it must have been 20 years ago. I was in Missouri and I was on a sustainable, egalitarian, organic farm, an intentional community. And I remember out there with, excuse my language, I can't remember the fella. He had a nice beard and he was a man of the land, and he was someone kind of like I wanted to be when I was young. It was like, oh, you're cool. I want to be like you when you're older. You're amazing. And I was farming with him every day, and we used to go out. And I remember they ran an organic biodynamic farm, and I remember we used to plant a cow's horn at a certain moon cycle, and then we used to you had to circle the water a certain amount of ways, one way and another way, and there was something very like we live in an age of rational and reason and logical, and there was a certain there was something very beautiful, and it was almost that gateway between the kind of not religious or monastic, but there was something really sacred about it.
Spirit.
I wonder if you could talk about biodynamic farming, because we apply an organic no dig where we're focused on growing as much nutrient dense food as possible. We're focused on how can we get as much nutrition to the soil and as much microbial action as possible. I wonder if you could talk about biodynamic and what biodynamic is, because many people might know, I know the Demeter stamp, I know what that means, but it's what is actual biodynamic farming and how does it differ from other approaches to farming?
So, there's so many kind of ways that you can also farm biodynamic. And I think there's, some farms around us specifically. We, live in an area called Forest Row. And, I've grown up in that kind of county. So where I've grown up is, it's East Sussex, Kent, that neck of the woods in the UK.
So south of London.
South of London, exactly. And so I lived in, Surrey my whole life, and very near us, actually. My mother was saying the other day that one of the first ever farm shops that she'd ever been to, and that she's taken me to taken me as a child, was Plawhatch. So I said, wow, okay, kind of in some cell memory somewhere has, reactivated my love for these farms again. So, this community, which has been going really since the 60s, this biodynamic community in Forest Row, have been kind of pioneers of this, biodynamic movement. And they have, 2 or 3, 4 of some of the best farming or farms in the country. So, big scale biodynamic farms, we have to take you guys there. Actually, that's the trip that we'll be on next. And, you know, there's different versions of, I suppose, the way that people practice. You can go incredibly deep into biodynamics, and that's what we've done on our land. You know, we work with the most wonderful team of real, like obsessive biodynamic heads. And it really is, I suppose, it is like a slightly religious, religious practice. It's, you know, deeply involving the, you know, the kind of the higher intelligence that
the cycles and the systems of nature.
Absolutely, and accessing that higher intelligence that you may call woo-woo, or some of us call, you know, quantum, or, you know, it's incredibly scientific if you really get, you know, down to the, you know, into the research. But biodynamics is, you know, it predates organic. I mean, organic comes from obviously the biodynamic practices. It's just a shortened version. And, you know, we use things like compresses, biodynamic compress. We make our own compost, and it's this kind of full 360 cycle. So everything that we do, that, you know, the whole entire ecosystem is self-sustaining. So that really is a very kind of...
So in terms of inputs, like the modern farm requires a lot of chemical inputs such as pesticides, fungicides, fungicides.
Exactly.
What you're talking about biodynamic is closed loop. You don't need to buy a lot of inputs.
Absolutely. You really don't. And, you know, they use a lot of, I suppose it's like homeopathic, you know, medicine for the soil. And again, that kind of homeopathy applied is, it's just what nature's given us. So it's not having to buy anything in. It's really you just utilizing what, you know, nature's given you to be able to treat the soil.
Amazing.
So, you know, and of course there are some really beautiful practices like the horn manure and the stirring of, you know, the vortex, and, you know, you can go really deep into it, and, you know, it does sound, yeah, I mean,
it does sound like witchcraft.
It does sound wild.
I'm sure people listening go, wow, that sounds like, but I do know the results, like it's been going for hundreds of years, and people wouldn't still be doing it unless it gave very good results.
The results it's interesting. One of the places where biodynamics has received like the most attention is in wines. And,
biodynamic wines.
Biodynamic wine is a big thing, and wine is like something where actually quality matters a lot, you know, so you're not just looking at yield or quantity, you're picking out those specific flavors, and is there magic in this, right? That's the whole question in wine. And if you can do the same thing with food, you know, and that's why among chefs they also go crazy for biodynamic produce. There's something about the rituals of biodynamics, you know, and rituals are these ways of concentrating attention, you know, and we've lost that so much in this rational modern age. And in biodynamics, you have all these prescriptions for rituals. You know, you're going to stir this, and then you're going to bury this, and then you're going to reveal it, and you're going to go to the corners, and exactly that it can seem to the contemporary mind a bit dotty, and it can seem a bit silly somehow, but somehow that attention and presence that you concentrate in the ritual makes better wine and makes tastier vegetables. It's quite mysterious. It's almost as if care is what we need.
Well, that's hilarious, because it reminds me of we recorded a podcast with Dan Kittredge, you know, the guy from the Bionutrient Institute in Massachusetts, amazing guy. But he told the story of he was mentoring a lady and mentoring through his process. And this was like, you know, it was very much, he's got his own kind of methodology, which is all regenerative. It's really, really impressive. All about remineralizing the soil. Anyway, he got this lady to follow it. She followed it for a full season, you know, started in autumn and went through the practices, started in spring. And he was coming towards the end of the season. It was August or whatnot. And he was coming just to review an on-site visit. And he goes around and he's like, oh, he's blown away. He's never seen a farm like this before. And he's gone through it, and oh my God, the leeks, and the broccoli, oh my God, and the tomatoes, wow. And then he gets to the onions and he's like, oh my God, like I've never seen an onion patch like this. He said, like, everyone is a honker. Like everyone is like nearly half a kilo. Like they're massive. And he said, like, you do not get that. You do not get that. Like that is so rare. And he said to her, listen, your farm is amazing. Like it's an A+. But your onions are like, they're from a different planet. They're so good. And he said to her, like, when you think back, like, what was the one difference you made to the onions? And she's thinking back and she says, like literally when we were planting them, we took a moment. We took about 3 minutes and we gave a really good intention to the onions. We said, thank you for the seed. And that was the only difference. So it kind of like absolutely woo-woo, and it sounds very out there, but it very much aligns with exactly what you're saying in terms of biodynamics. That and exactly as I was looking at your Instagram, Farmacy Instagram last night, and there was a great video of some doctor was talking about plants being sentient beings that have the same receptors to be able to see and hear and feel, and there is some kind of capacity within them. So I know that sounds crazy to lots of people, but it does feel right. It
only sounds crazy if you've been trained to think that the only thing that alive is people, which is kind of what our contemporary culture is sort of ingraining in us. But everything is alive, especially the plants. The plants are the OGs. They've been on land long before there were animals, long before there were humans. So of course they're alive. And we really do have to get this trained out of us, like why is a home cooked meal so good? It's the same principle, like why is your grandmother's soup so much better than anything that you could buy in any store? We know that attention matters. We know that care matters, that what happens in intimacy changes things. So it's the same in farms, and if you test the proposition, if you go and you start planting things and you whisper sweet nothings to the plants, like you'll get different results. It's an idea that's been put into our heads that that's somehow magical thinking. But if you go and you test it, like you'll see it. It matters.
100%. And it kind of lies into like modern day manifesting has become really, really popular. And it's a similar approach. It's putting intention or putting presence or putting love in essence into what you're doing. And ultimately, like the difference between a good meal and a bad meal can often be the intention of the chef.
Absolutely.
And I know that can sound, to someone listening, that can sound heebie-jeebie, but as you said, you go to your granny soup and it's celery and it's carrots, all these veg, which typically my children don't like. And yet you cook it and my children go, Dad, do you have any more of that soup? And I'm like, what?
Putting all that love in that soup. Yeah.
You should try Camilla's soup.
Well, it makes something after. It makes something we can make all sorts of difference we can play. Okay, I want to move the conversation slightly because I read your book and I was so inspired. I really, really was. And I'd really love the context of why you wrote it, because to me as the reader, the main message I got from it is there is such an opportunity in our crazy world of chaos and change and, so much rapid deterioration of lots of aspects of society. You both talked about the opportunity that food provides for us, and you talk about the opportunity of humans to be a keystone species, which, people might have heard of keystone species and thought, they're elephants and their wolves are a keystone species, but the opportunity that humans aren't behaving like a keystone species. Well, this is a question for Aurora and Camilla, that the opportunity that food gives to kind of, a bit like you said, soil is at the root of. Soil is more important than anything. You talked about the whole message of the whole book is about the opportunity within food to change society in every way that we can imagine.
So I think the definition of a keystone species is a species that helps to define the character of a landscape. And in a given landscape, a keystone species allows many other species to have their life in that landscape as well. So they help to create habitat conditions for other forms of life. I think this is a very interesting idea for thinking about our role as humans on this earth, because it's very natural when you grow up in an industrial society and you see environmental catastrophes left and right, and you see the despoiling of nature that we're implicated in. It's very easy to think of ourselves as some sort of scourge on planet Earth. But it doesn't have to be that way. And what's so incredible is when you take a look at what's being done by regenerative farmers on small scales and on large scales, you realize that yes, most agriculture is a highly destructive activity. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's possible for agriculture to actually build soil. It's possible for agricultural practices to create habitat for many more species on the microscopic level, on all sorts of different levels. Like Vandana Shiva, every time we speak to her, she tells us about how on her farm in India, they have 6 times more kinds of bees on her farm as in the adjacent forest. So there's examples, and you were asking earlier as well about like the connection between soil and the progress of civilizations. And David Montgomery has this incredible book. I don't know if you've read it. It's called Dirt: The Erosion of Civilizations. And he maps over 1,000-year cycles most societies or most empires, as you know, they start felling trees, they learn how to plow, and slowly but surely, without anyone really noticing, over centuries they lose their soil, and then eventually, you know, the empire collapses, and no one realizes it's collapsing because of the soil. They think, you know, they're having skirmishes with the barbarians, you know, or supply chain.
It's politics, or it's technology. We're not advancing our technology
but
as
it's
fast.
all fundamentally, you know, because they've run out of soil. And of course, that's the same thing that's happening to our society now as well. So it's quite interesting when you realize that most societies go in that direction. Most of us lose our dirt, we lose our soil, but if we can figure out a way, and some people have figured out ways to do agriculture in a way that builds soil, then it flips everything around. And so that's why, you know, this is what Camilla and I have always bonded on, this sort of passionate obsession with food, because every time you sit down to eat, like you said, it's an opportunity, and it can be an onerous responsibility, but you literally have the opportunity to vote with your fork. Are you voting for a more vital world out there and in here, or for something else? You know, every time you eat, you get to shift the whole train of civilization and the whole progress of humanity towards something that can actually generate life.
And when we always ask people, you know, if we're doing, you know, dinner, supper clubs, what is the system that you personally are contributing to? Like, what do you want to contribute to? And I think when all you need to do is ask yourself that. I mean, literally before every meal, before every bite that you have. And that's how you, as the human being, has that responsibility. It's not up to the collective. It's actually you. You can vote personally with making and taking those actions. And it's, you know, what world do you want to see? What world do you want to contribute to? Is it this kind of chemical agriculture? This as well, you know, we always discuss this kind of these two systems that we have. Why do we have these two systems? It's conventional. What is conventional about, you know, spraying our whole entire, you know, globe with pesticides and chemicals, or this other system called organic farming? Why isn't it called chemical agriculture and organic or natural agriculture? What is so conventional about the food system that we have currently? So that constant, like, oh, actually, what am I buying? What am I spending my money on? What am I feeding my children with? Like, what system are you contributing to? Is it the chemical agriculture system, or is it the organic, natural way that we've always, you know, been part of? And I think, you know, this sense of this hope that I always have, and this hope that I want to bring to, you know, the team and the people around us and you know, around Farmacy, is that it's only really been since the Second World War that we've been destroying our
green
soils.
revolution.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's really not that far. It's just one generation back. You know, we love Silent Spring, this really beautiful book, and Rachel Carson, you know, and she was this kind of explosion of you know, the knife in the ground that was in just after the World War II. So she was the one that connected the dots between all the, you know, the chemical weapons, then turning that, you know, putting those into the soils. So this is not so far back that we can, you know, that we have time and we have the knowledge and intelligence to now, you know, reinvigorate our soils and our landscapes. It's not thousands of years of destruction. It's literally just one generation. So there's hope.
I love everything that you're saying. A question comes up for me and for people listening. They might go, is this not something that's limited to the privileged people? What about for everyone? Like, why? This is something that to me is so apparent and so needed, and so that, and I was someone that was born into privilege. I'm someone that is extremely privileged upbringing. What about people who are less privileged? How do we get this out? How do we move this on?
Because it seems like a human right. It seems like a human right.
Yes.
That if I look back to our grandparents' age, a lot of the produce was grown in their garden. You know, you knew who grew your produce. There was no such thing as chemical inputs. Like, it was just horse, you know, it was manure of some variety. That was about as much as the input you'd put in. Whereas now our food system, as you said, it's, you know, well, as you certainly say in the book, most people are just used to it. It's just the way that it is. But it is a food system that comes out of factories. It's based around chemical inputs. It's based around control. As you say in the book, there's, you know, I think there's 12 crops and 3 animal foods make up 70% of our food system, of the food which we eat. Whereas there is something like, I don't know, there's thousands of plants which we can eat and thousands of foods we do eat. So there wasn't a question.
On to the question. Now back to privilege. But I appreciate your input there, David. Thank you very much.
What was the question?
It was more like for someone listening, they might approach this with cynicism. They might go, everything is right, but you're privileged.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. How do you respond to that? Because this is something that this movement needs to overcome and needs to address, because I'm a person of privilege and I'm very akin to this.
There's three things that I think are really important to say on this point. One is that currently organic food is competing against a subsidized alternative, and that sucks. So, humanity spends 500 billion a year on agricultural subsidies that go to giant farms and take everything in the wrong direction. This is not my opinion. Like the UN has published saying 90% of those agricultural subsidies are perverse. So if you're giving subsidies to try to get better health outcomes, better environmental outcomes, they're going in the opposite direction. So then you have, a small scale organic farmer making food, as trying to make the numbers fit when you've got the guys next door literally getting government subsidies to go do things the wrong way. So that needs to change, and that's a huge project. And until that changes, prices aren't reflecting the truth, right? If you were to factor just one form of pollution, which is nitrogen pollution, if you factored that into the price of food, the conventional food would automatically be 30% more expensive. So these are very complex sort of macroeconomic things, but that's what we're dealing with. Prices are not telling us the truth. Prices are masked. So that's one issue that needs to, we need to figure out as a community how to work on that. The other thing is that it's true that in many times and places, like organic produce is more expensive, but it's a lot more expensive than organic vegetables. Processed food. Like if you're spending money on potato chips and all the things that come ready-made, that come in wrapped in plastic in supermarkets, that's a lot more expensive than if you figure out how to buy food and cook it at home with love for the people that you care about. Of course, a lot of times economic poverty aligns with time poverty. So it's not something, there's all sorts of factors there. But if you are trying to feed your family well with a limited budget, cooking at home is a beautiful direction to go in. And then another thing I like to say is, for the people who are privileged, if you do have the privilege of choosing what kind of food you're going to eat and where you're going to buy your food, then you have the biggest opportunity of all, because not only are you doing something for your own health and for the health of your family by buying food from these systems, from these farmers, from these kinds of...
Supporting these systems.
Exactly. You're also supporting them, and you're in a way financing the research and development so that these small agroecological systems can one day be writ large and available to everyone. So if you have the option, definitely do it. Do it for yourself and do it for the world.
100%. And it doesn't have to be expensive. Like, we often say for anyone who does want to eat more whole food, plant-based food, it's the peasant food. It's not expensive
and it's
food.
the most delicious, right?
When it's cooked well.
Like you said, the potatoes and the celery and the carrots, it's the best.
And it's also, one thing, it's about perception, right? Like, what is this perception of cost? And I think in this, kind of crazy consumerism world that we've been, subjected to, it's like, what do you want to spend your money on? And is that a new iPhone that costs, X, or is it a handbag or a designer pair of shoes or whatever it is, versus spending that on something that really matters, like your food, your health. So it's just that perception of cost and where do you want to spend your money? Is it on that holiday? Is it on that, designer bag or shoes? Or is it on your health, your well-being, your wellness, your mental health, your family's health? So again, it's this, this perspective change, which I, very much promote, and also this huge lack of education. Ultimately, there is very little education to say actually what is really good for us. And I think it's deliberate. It's look at the language around food, look at the language around, even the word conventional. It's this kind of Hegelian dialect, which is, kind of there to deceive. And I think, how many billions of dollars, pounds are spent on, these food corporations actually are there to deceive people. And to that sense of deception really is the perception that people have around food and what's good for them and not good for them. So it's mass brainwashing, you name it. It's a jungle out there to try and decipher really this this world of food of what is good for you and not good for you.
I think ultimately it goes back to eating more whole plant foods, which typically if you go to a supermarket, it's the things that aren't in plastic. So it can be simple, like anything in life, when you reduce it, obviously. But I think in an age of industrial farming, in an age of centralized food systems, I think one of the biggest acts of rebellion you can do is make conscious food choices and to try to choose local, try to support your local farmer, try to choose organic where possible.
And I was going to say, it comes back to the very dedication within your book, which is just, it sums it all up in about 14 words. To all who have realized that they can vote with their forks. Like, it's so profound. It's so simple yet so profound. Maybe you could just go into this, because the opportunity within someone's food choices are immense. Like, they're so immense. And as you implied at the very start, you said like soil is at the root of it all. It's not technology. It's not these things. And that just summarizes it all. Can you kind of just maybe lean into, we haven't leaned so much into the industrial food system, and maybe you could talk about the industrial food system and how it might be linking towards some of the disease and the state of this within each of us as individuals, because the opportunity that it's as individuals, but it's also has a massive macro
society.
Wave-like effect.
Just one thing on that, I was seeing a study that came out last week in the British Medical Journal about in the UK, the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition. It found that they're paid by the big food companies, the Nestle's and the Unilevers. So 11 out of the 17 people that are making recommendations. And like, why does this matter? Well, the rates of obesity have tripled in the UK in my lifetime. Same heart disease, diabetes, all of these, lifestyle diseases, they're at all-time highs. And that's because the people that can make that have a vested interest, the companies that have a vested interest in taking our appetites in a certain direction, don't only run the companies, they're running the government advisory as well. It's this same committee that in 2020, in June 2020, said that vitamin D had no effect on respiratory infection recovery, which is just insane. Again, like every grandmother knows, if you're ill, you need sunlight, fresh air, rest. And so then to suddenly have people coming and telling us like, oh, no, just stay indoors, don't move your body, don't get any sunlight, just sit tight while we're going to develop some drugs and bring them to you. Like, it's actually insane. And it only makes sense if you follow the money and you look at the profit motive. So it is kind of a big deal, right? Because it's the same that happens like with the attention economy and all these social medias that have armies of people designed to trick you and take your attention so that they can make money off of it. It's exactly the same with food. The big food companies have psychologists, marketers, food scientists engineering these ultra processed foods to hijack your body's reward circuits. That's simply the case. So then we have these highly engineered foods that cultivate addictions to undermine the human will, and that's so that they can make money. So you're up against a lot as a consumer, right? You just want to, go and get a bite, and that's what you're up against. But at the same time, I think the solution is very simple. As you said, whole foods, as you've said, going back to nature. What do you do when you have like committees and, papers and all these things sort of taking you in a direction that can be quite confusing? I think you have to just, go back to the simple things, the natural things, the things that have always been there. And that's soil, sunshine, air, get outside. And I think that the basic things will become apparent.
Exactly. And I think this is why I started the business, out of this kind of deep want and need for truth and this activism that comes around, where do you get your information from, and who are you listening to, and who's writing the articles in the media, who's writing all these things, who are they funded by? Because there's so much deception and so much lies, is that it's almost next to impossible to decipher who is telling you the truth now. Exactly as Aurora said, look at COVID 2020. We sat in our homes watching a box, waiting for this kind of miracle medicine to come out to let us outside of our homes. where were the people, where were the advisors, the doctors coming on our Black Mirror box saying, right, guys, let's get out, let's exercise, let's, let's eat whole foods, all of those very...
You can eat 30 different whole foods this week, folks. Let's build up our super microbiome.
Exactly.
Imagine, like, where were those people? They were silenced. They were, it was called misinformation. Do you not remember all this? Like, oh, you were not allowed to post on Instagram in 2020 about any sort of natural remedies. You were kind of promoting misinformation. I mean, people were shadow banned in that era of, this is what...
For recommending some fresh air.
Yeah, recommending fresh air, recommending, the human touch, the hug, all of those things. And it was just... it's kind of bizarre, this world that we live in now. It's like, the quest for like any sense of truth now is like, you've really, really got to dig deep, and you've really got to kind of, it's almost like you go back to unlearning, and that sense of like just going, right, what did my grandmother teach us? What did my great grandmother do? Because looks like that generation was, far more successful than the generation that we've, been born into. And then unfortunately the ones beneath us, it's a minefield of information and misinformation. So yeah, it's tricky times.
On that note, my wife is Polish, and I'll go to Poland every year a number of times, and her parents are 85 and 84, and they've lived a very simple existence where they grow their own food. They spend much of their time processing their food, and by processing I mean canning it or pickling it or preparing it in various different ways. And to the modern day lifestyle, it might be deemed quite basic or quite simple, but there's someone that can sit and look out the window for 10 minutes and feel comfortable. And there's someone that has a real purpose. They're 84, 85. And I got a picture there the other day. They were out in the field planting potatoes and harvesting potatoes. And it's just like, there's such a connection, respect, like symbiosis with the natural world. And to me, that's success. Whereas modern day, people often at that age group are in homes because their family members can't care for them. And I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but I know which I prefer, and I know which means success for me. When I spend time with my father-in-law, he's a vibrant, holy man that I'm just like, wow, I want to be like you. I really do when I'm older. And I think this is more success to me than much of what modern day culture espouses. But I went off.
Beautiful. Okay. There was a quote here from the book. So the book, just to reiterate the name, it's The Manifesto and the Future of Food. It's an incredible read. Like, it's quite easy. I read it in about 2.5 hours. It's lovely.
You're a very quick reader, Dave.
No, I'm not. I'm slow. I'm a slow reader. And I was copying stuff out. And you might think it is recipes or it's about food, but it's very philosophical. And there's so much of a spine and a thread. And as I said to you earlier when I met you, I said, I'd love to have the children's version of this that is pictures, because there's so many incredible threads linking these massive topics like food and industrial agriculture and regenerative agriculture and all the various things. But there was one quote I just want to read here. It says, it talks about, it says the data is in. If we continue in this trajectory over the long term, industrial agriculture will create the conditions for the collapse of our civilization. If we make the transition to the regenerative paradigm, we will be creating the conditions for a renaissance that extends beyond agriculture. We sit down and nourish ourselves, and every time we do, we are casting a vote for what we want in our inner and outer landscapes to be like. For food to fulfill this promise, it must come from and in turn nourish the living soil. Then it can serve as a connector, regenerating the biomes of both our bodies and the land, and we will see below. So in that quote, what I see is, the first one says that about the current food system is going to be the end of civilization, which who knows, but we are definitely...
Maybe.
If I look at our lifetime, it wouldn't be crazy to imagine that we become extinct within the next 50 or 100 years. You look at sterility, you look at disease, you look at just the breakdown of society. It wouldn't be crazy to imagine it. I'm talking about imagine. And food being such an important part of this. If you look at, as you said at the start of Farmacy's journey, was your own experience with autoimmune diseases. And I see when we went to school, there was very little very little allergies. There was very little autoimmune diseases. I'm sure testing has one aspect of it, but you can see the rise in human health seems to be deteriorating in certain aspects, and food is definitely some contributing factor towards it. So I'm asking you guys the question. Sorry, I'm going asking and answering.
What's the question?
The question was about, so within your quote you had about, the current food system is very linked to the possible
Health,
demise of our
health
society,
issues.
and then it talks about the opportunity within regenerative within our food system to regenerate a renaissance of not just our food system but our societies at large.
There's hope.
So we're moving more into hope now.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild. I think there's no way that we can change the food system without changing something inside ourselves. And so that's the beautiful sort of back and forth, right? That the food that we eat, if it comes from the right sort of agriculture, the right healthy soil, it makes us alive. And the more alive we become, the more that we're able to go and bring that life back into the world around us. So like we are nature, and nature is inside of us, and then we are part of that nature. And so it's this virtuous cycle. But it begins with changing ourselves, I think. And that's the crazy thing about food. It's quite literally the substrate of our bodies. And of course, our bodies are what hold our minds. Our minds are what then go out and create the world around us. Like half of habitable land on Earth is dedicated to human agriculture. So you can't talk about solving ecological crises without talking about how we do agriculture. You can't talk about solving health crises, to your point, without talking about how we feed ourselves. So food sits right at the intersection of anything that we have to solve out there to make our civilization viable, and anything that we need to solve in here to make our civilization viable. And as we were saying earlier, like the incredible thing about regenerative agriculture is not just that you get delicious food that's good for you, but you're actually regenerating the landscapes out there. And that's why voting for your fork, it's not only something delicious, it's like, it's such a powerful act. And anywhere you go today, you have that opportunity. You can seek out your local farmer. You can maybe grow a bit of your own food. Even if you're in a city, you can, put some things out on a balcony.
What about someone there who goes, but I'm just one person. I'm just one person and my family just isn't into this. What do you say to them?
Well, I like to say that, it just takes one person to change the world, right?
Yes! Woo, come on!
Can I get an amen?
Well, it's like, what is it Margaret Mead said? She said, never doubt that a small group of passionate people can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has.
Yes.
Sorry if I'm burning someone's ears.
Absolutely. Radical self-responsibility. And I think once you take responsibility for your health, you start to feel those changes. You start to feel, these kind of different chemical reactions in the body and the mind. You start to feel different, think different, and your whole entire inner landscapes and then outer landscapes change. And I think that's this kind of osmosis effect on, that one person can have in society. It's you change, then you can change the world. And that's why we kind of, try and do our best, within the kind of pharmacy realms to empower people to take health back into your own hands. Rely on yourself and rely on that inner wisdom and inner knowledge that we all innately have, that we need to trust more. We need to trust ourselves more, listen to that intuition, listen to that quiet voice within that tells you, maybe I'm going to, cook my own food tonight instead of go out and get a, takeaway or order that Deliveroo. And I think it's just that, it's self-responsibility. And I think that is what we try and, kind of amplify that message within the business, because it is, it's really you that can change the world.
Yeah, I think in an age when many people are feeling disconnected or feeling disempowered, disenfranchised, alone, isolated,
yes.
Your food choices are something that can help you regain your sovereignty, something that can give you agency, something that can give you a greater purpose to support a better world and a vote for the future and for future generations and for future microbes and future health in essence. And I think it's something that many of us can undermine or undervalue. And I think that's something that's so important.
Well, look, we have truly an epidemic of loneliness. You know, there are so many lonely people in this world, which has itself, you know, great health impacts. And I think just being part of a community that belongs to, you know, the land, farming, you know, knowing your farmer, being, you know, involved in that sense of community can really solve, you know, one of those, you know, such a big issue like that. So, you know, there is just so much that, you know, just connecting to nature and connecting your food can bring to you. And I think that's also what we try and champion, is this sense of community. And that community is ultimately what's good for your health. You know, we thrive in community. We don't thrive alone.
Beautiful. Okay, I'd love to land this now. So Farmacy, your book is incredible. Beautiful is. You've got a cookbook as well.
Beautiful is.
It's beautiful. It really is. A manifesto on the future of food. Glorious. And you've got a cookbook, and now you started, as Stephen said, you started with a 1 acre farm, and now you've got a much larger farm. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that and what your vision, or what's the future? Because both of you could be spending your time on so many different things. You could both be working in tech, you could both be doing all sorts of different things, but instead you see food to be the greatest opportunity for change, which I really salute. I really admire the fact that you're both such smart, capable,
articulate.
Yeah, people that are just going, like really seeing that food is the answer. So, sorry, my question is about Farmacy, and what are you doing now, and what's your vision for it going forward?
Yeah, I mean, my vision for Farmacy is really to be at service, right? So we are a business, you know, very much, you know, that's mission driven. So we are here to be at service to, you know, the people that we are serving, you know, our community that comes through the door and enjoys this delicious food and breaks bread with us. And I think, you know, we've done all the hard work for you. You know, all you need to do is just come in and eat and have this experience of, you know, beautifully made conscious food. The vision for the future is really to spread that message far and wide as possible. So we just closed our first site that we were living in for 8 years.
That was in Notting Hill and Westbourne Grove.
Notting Hill West.
The first week, one of the first,
Yeah.
maybe the first month.
Well, I
loved
met
it.
you guys there. I mean, it was quite a while ago. You know, and I was kind of geeking out on meeting you two, because I think you were one of the first businesses that I kind of ever looked at on my vision board, going like, hey, they do this, and they've been doing this successfully for 20 years. So, you know, you were a real kind of, it was a hero moment. I was like really, you know, really, excited to meet you and spend time with you.
This really cool person does, and it was like, wow, this is a cool, like New York style, like farm-based, plant-based restaurant in London. Wow, this is so cool. She's really cool. This is what's gone through our minds. It's funny, isn't it?
That's hilarious. So the vision for the future is just to expand. We are building our new site still in West London. So not too far from the original site. It's going to be our permanent home. Would like to do more education, really kind of focus on, you know, real chef-driven courses. So we really feel that chefs are, you know, they hold the gospel of the soil. You know, they are the ones that can, you know, really transform our food, but also they are closest to the produce and closest to the ingredients. So we work a lot with, you know, we have been working with chefs initiatives already at Farmacy, the original one. So we want to develop that much deeper and really kind of empower the community around hospitality and specifically the industry in general, because that really is where we feel that we can make the biggest difference in getting this message out there. And of course, serve amazingly delicious, biodynamically driven food.
Beautiful. Magic. Final thoughts? Have we covered it all?
Yeah.
Have we ticked it all off?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
We could be here for hours.
I mean, the best part of all this is that it's delicious, right? Like, it's about having a really nice plate of food with some people that you love and connecting to the beautiful stories behind that food. So I think it's all in the delight.
Beautiful.
And fun. Let's just have fun with it. This is the whole point. And that's, you know, that's the joy of being, you know, in this kind of, in the industry, is that you get to meet incredibly, you know, weird and wonderful people along the journey. I always say that like running a restaurant has been probably the biggest human experiment journey that I've ever,
you just sit there and they all walk into the door.
Exactly. It's like a social experiment, really, running a restaurant. I'm sure you guys understand that too. So it's been, what an experience, what a joy. You know, it's been
What
really
a joy
beautiful.
and a challenge.
Yeah, of course. That doesn't come without
definitely.
challenge.
If you're someone that enjoys hard work, food, that concept of breaking bread and that opportunity to bring people together to support whatever food system it is that you believe in and really consciously try to create a difference in terms of society, because ultimately at the root of all of society, albeit people think it's tech, it's pharma, it's finance, ultimately it's food. We all have to eat. Without food, we don't exist. And as Aurora said at the start, like, food is that opportunity to connect with the landscape, connect with the season, to literally consume nature's love. And I know that sounds a bit ephemeral and a bit esoteric, but it really does.
It is.
Like, even picking blackberries yesterday, I was just picking them, and like when you get a real sweet ripe one and you just taste that like liquid blackberry sunshine, it's what a little moment.
I think that's the meaning of life. I think that's why we're here, you know, for moments just like that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. You're amazing.
And thank you for coming over.
Yeah, it's really, really, what a treat.
This has been
so
like,
fun.
in our diary for a long time, and we've been like, desperate to come out here. And thank you guys. You guys do an incredible job, and you've set the way, you know, for so many of us. So thank you for what you've done.
Beautiful.
Thank you.